Wonderful. Okay, well, we're doing pretty good here. We're about a little over halfway through a Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And we're touching a chapter today called To Polish a Tile. Did any of you see the Karate Kid way back in the days when it came out, that movie? About a young boy who goes to learn from Miyagi, a a uh, uh, a karate black belt teacher. I guess it was higher than that, but anyway,
Was it
Miyagi.
China?
Yeah,
Was
well,
it?
Miyagi gives his first task, and it takes him a month, is to paint the fence, this big privacy fence in the backyard of the teacher. And he's teaching him how to do it, and how he wants the brushstrokes to be even and singular all the way through and all the way around. And of course, the young man throws a big fit because he just thinks that he's giving free work to this man by painting his fence. But it actually, was to teach him patience, coordination, control, teach him Vedanta fundamentally, basically. But I was brought to that idea because here, to polish a tile sounds very similar. And I took that into the monastery with me, and that's really how I lasted the first few years, because the first 12 years, I got to wash dishes, and I got to mow and weed the gardens, and I got to clean all the bathrooms in the temple twice a week. And, none of it seemed like particularly spiritual monk work at all. And it was because of that movie that that I kind of thought, well, maybe this is what's going on. Maybe I'm being trained in a different way. Yeah. And then I found out, no, that's just the way life is. All right. So I'm muting everybody, but you're welcome to unmute and say anything you like to say within reason. And we'll jump in. To polish a tile. Oh, gosh. I keep thinking my glasses are optional, and they're not anymore, but today they are. All right. When you become you, Zen becomes Zen. When you are you, you see things as they are, and you become one with your surroundings. All right, so there's just a little tidbit of what enlightenment is like when you finally become you, when you finally become authentic. Zen stories, or koans, are very difficult to understand before you know what we are doing moment after moment. But if you know exactly what we are doing in each moment, you will not find koans so difficult. There are so many koans. I have often talked to you about a frog, and each time everybody laughs. But a frog is very interesting. He sits like us too, but he does not think that he is doing anything so special. When you go to a zendo and sit, you may think that you're doing something special. While your husband or wife is sleeping, you are practicing zazen. You are doing some special thing, and your spouse is lazy. That may be your understanding of zazen. But look at the frog. A frog also sits like us, but he has no idea of zazen. Watch him. If something annoys him, he will make a face. If something comes along to eat, he will snap it up and eat. And he eats sitting. Actually, that is our zazen, not anything special. Now, why do you think he keeps pressing this idea of not anything special to our practice? It's because our practice is to make us normal. Our practice is to be what we are. It's nothing special. We're not trying to accomplish some amazing feat. Our ego minds have set that up. The ego does that. The ego makes it, whenever you talk about how difficult your practice is or how difficult it is to practice, you can know that the ego is pressing itself to be in charge. Because the ego wants to be the hero, the superhero that comes in and saves you, in your difficult efforts to realize God, and then the ego gets reinforced when you are successful. You've sat for your hour and a half, you're a power meditator, and you start getting a reputation for being a power meditator, and the ego is just super satisfied. And so that's why I'm always very careful when we start talking about our practice in those terms about, oh, it's difficult. Oh, it's going to be a couple of lifetimes for me. Oh, I just can't control the mind. When we create story like that, it comes to life. And we've talked about that ad nauseum because it's very true. And because it's something that even if we talked about it every hour today, we would still do it today. And so that's why we repeat these things over and over. So we're not out to do something special. We're not out to become, gloriously unique. We're out to become human beings, to find out what it is and what we were destined and are destined to be. Here is a kind of frog koan for you. Baso was a famous Zen master called the Horse Master. He was the disciple of Nangaku, one of the 6 patriarch's disciples. One day, while he was studying under Nangaku, Baso was sitting practicing zazen. He was a man of large physical build. When he talked, his tongue reached to his nose, his voice was loud, and his zazen must have been very good. Nangaku saw him sitting like a great mountain, or like a frog. Nangaku asked, "What are you doing?" "I am practicing zazen," Baso replied. "Why are you practicing zazen?" "I want to attain enlightenment. I want to be a Buddha." The disciple said, "Do you know what the teacher did? He picked up a tile and he started to polish it. In Japan, after taking a tile from the kiln, we polish it to give it a beautiful finish. So Nangaku picked up a tile and started to polish it. Baso, his disciple, asked, "What are you doing?" "I want to make this tile into a jewel," Nangaku said. "How is it possible to make a tile a jewel?" Baso asked. "How is it possible for you to become a Buddha by practicing zazen?" Nangaku replied, "Do you want to attain Buddhahood? There is no Buddhahood besides your ordinary mind. When a cart does not go, which do you whip, the cart or the horse?" the master asked. This is a beautiful little couple of clues here about the nature of practice and the nature of realization. That if we sit with the gaining idea, he covered that about 2 chapters ago. If we have this idea that we practice our spiritual life to gain something, to add something to us, that's the wrong spirit of practice, and it will be a dead end. It will lengthen our path because it will be increasing ego. Ego is what gives us the sense of lack or the sense of need. It's the one that projects imperfection on the moment. And so when we try and sit in order to perfect the moment or to shoot for some imagined day in the future when we will finally realize God because we've accumulated enough practice or enough knowledge or enough humility or enough purity, all these things, because we always forget, and actually not only forget, our mind really can't understand something outside of cause and effect, right? The mind can't think of something, can't think of an effect that has no cause, because that's how the mind works. The mind is what contains time, space, and causation, right? It's part of the tool. Your mind is your hammer that you're using to pull out the other thorn, so that it can be clear and God can be seen as God has always been. And so we don't practice to accumulate. We practice to disrobe, really. We practice to take off ignorance, to remove ignorance, so that which is obvious, that which is true, that which is real, that which has always been real, even at the moment now as we sit, can become apparent to us. We can realize it, we can see it. And so that realization is the only effect with no cause. So we don't know why we're doing it. If your practice is not the cause of the enlightenment effect, then why are you practicing? What are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to know what is, and what is what is. So you just have to stop giving a spin to what is. And that's what the mind and ego does. It gives a spin to what is. It doesn't allow you to see it as it is. It's the ego that breaks everything into pieces. It's the ego that looks for difference and then looks for sameness as a secondary thing. So this is when ego's in charge, and he's telling us your ego is not going to realize God. This is a very interesting thing to me. A thought one time occurred to me that we don't realize God. All of us think that we will have our realization. We won't have our realization. We will never realize God, because the realization is that there's no us. So who's having the realization? It's not the ego you. It's not the you with a name. So it's not that, Swami C is going to realize God, or that Jan is going to realize God. That which is Jan is already realized. What's going to happen is Jan is going to drop the notion of Jan and return to herself, return to her ever-present, ever-blissful, ever-holy self. Nothing will happen. Just a delusion, a pretense will disappear. So it's only God that has realizations. God realizes himself over and over and over and over and over again through billions of bodies. And this is not teaching, but it's an idea that I liked. That when Ramakrishna had his realization, and he said, that the temple walls fell away, and he saw an infinite expanse of light, the light of consciousness, this ocean of consciousness, and waves of bliss, these waves of bliss rushing toward him with such a ferocity that they threaten to wipe out his very sense of I. And then they do. And that's the end of the story, because there's nothing else he can say at that point. He went into samadhi for quite some time after that. But what were those waves of bliss in this ocean of consciousness? I like to think that each one of those waves was God realizing himself through another birth yet again. That those waves of bliss in the ocean of consciousness is just this self-realization happening over and over and over again in the ocean of the divine, the infinity of the divine. So we don't have a realization. We will not realize God. We will drop ourselves. That's what we will do. We will drop our wrong notion of who we are and enjoy the bliss of God. And we will then we will then take our place in the ocean of consciousness as a wave of bliss, right? That is your nature. Your nature is bliss. You are one of the waves of bliss that Thakur experienced and saw just before he merged in that ocean of light, the light of consciousness, the light of love. So that is where you are already. That is you already. And so, as we read in the first chapter, we don't sit to realize God. We sit, why did he say? We sit to realize that we are already realized. Okay? So you sit there to realize that you're already realized, not to accomplish something. And that's how we try to counter the development of ego. Because anytime you do anything in this world that's accumulative, the ego is right there, counting dice, man. He's counting out the change. Oh boy, look, we got 50 more cents. Because the ego, which doesn't exist, as we've mentioned, the ego doesn't exist, so it's eternally insecure. So it's constantly trying to convince itself of its own existence, right? And that's what a vast majority of your life is doing. It's constantly trying to verify your existence and then build up that sense of existence through the body and mind anyway. And we get caught up in that. That's where our stories come from. That's where our personalities come from. And that's, where we pile all of our possessions up together, is because we're letting ego run the show. The ego always has a gaining idea. So he's pushing hard against this, not to have this idea toward our practice. All right, because egos don't, just like tiles can't become jewels, egos can't become realized. Egos can only be given up. Nangaku's meaning here is that whatever you do, that is zazen, right? So we've talked about that. Your life is practice. Everything that you do is a prayer. Everything that you do is a direct petition to the divine. So you never stop praying. You are always praying. And to become aware of the fact that you pray without ceasing is really the answer to the or to the pilgrim's way. You know, as he was wandering, trying to figure out what that scripture means. That's what that scripture means. It's part of realization. You realize that your life was a prayer. Everything you did, thought, and said was a petition to your beloved mother. Nangaku's meaning here is that whatever you do, that is zazen, that is practice. True zazen is beyond being in bed or sitting in the zendo. If your husband or wife is in bed, that is zazen. If you think I am sitting here and my spouse is in bed, then even though you are sitting here in the cross-legged position, that is not true zazen. You should be like a frog always. That is true zazen. So he's talking about being present, being fully here. That's your practice. Your practice is not to meditate and to do all of those things. Those are all there as well. They're all helpful, but that's not the point. The point of all of those things is to allow you to sit here and be fully present here. So like the frog sitting there, he's fully aware that fly goes by. He doesn't have to come to and then suddenly decide what to do. That fly comes by, man, that tongue is out, that fly is captured, and dinner has been had. You know, so he's very alert. He's very present as he sits there, very relaxed, being a frog. He's not sitting there thinking about the tax bill and how he's going to get that done by April 15th, you know. Not sitting there watching all the other pretty froglets swim by and, criticizing them for having so many tadpoles. He's not like that. He's just sitting there fully present, being what he is, what she is. And that's the call that our brother here is telling us. You do all of this practice, all of these things, simply so that you can finally be what you are, that you can be fully in this moment and not have your mind wondering, thinking this, that, and the other, not needing things, not making plans to get things, not thinking about what things need to be fixed from the past. It's a matter of just being able to finally be at peace, to be where you are, to know that all is well, and to know that it's love in you that's shining out. Dogen Zenji commented on this koan. He said, when the horse master becomes the horse master, Zen becomes Zen. When Baso becomes Baso, his Zazen becomes true Zazen, and Zen becomes Zen. What is true Zazen? When you become you. When you are you, then no matter what you do, that is Zazen. Even though you are in bed, you may not be you most of the time. Even though you are sitting on the zendo, I wonder whether you are you in the true sense. Yeah, so he's just reiterating, being you. And this is an interesting thing because, Sri Nisargadatta made it very interesting in our class on Monday night. He talks in there about the need for the higher self. It's kind of an interesting thing because I should pull it out and read it if I'm going to talk about it. But he says that the higher self should recognize the lower self as its own projection, that there has to be a full acceptance on the part of the witness self and the manifested self, the ego self. And that because those two have to unite, those are the two women under the tree that Thakur says we have to learn to live with, both of them. It's this lower self and this higher self, and the relationship between the two of them. We identify fully with the lower one, and we're always griping about the higher one, the one that wants us to get up and meditate, and we're saying, I don't want to do that right now, or the one that tells you, I'll get up and go to temple, and you're like, oh, I got to sleep today. We are fully identified with that lower bird jumping around the branches, eating all the fruits, and that higher bird we just get annoyed by. But it's the higher bird that is being us. It's the higher bird that's being natural, being what it is. And it's the lower bird that's living in distraction, living in ignorance, running around trying to ignore this constant call of that higher bird because it wants to be what it thinks itself to be, not what it is. And so this inner world, we have to bring these two voices together. I'm experimenting and I'm giving it off like I'm teaching it, but it's more of an experiment that these two selves inside manifest as the witness, that which is watching your thought, and the thinker. And that is what causes duality, because we ourselves become two people. We split our sentience into two. We think and then we listen to our thinking. And I think the state of realization is there is no thinker. That's the ego self. That's the story self that's living in the changing. That's the disturbed mind. And so when that silences, that's when the two birds become one. You don't have the thinking bird and you don't have the listening bird anymore. You just have the bird. And that is you, and you manifest in your own special way. Thakur, even though he has come many times as an avatar, even though he came as Buddha and he came as Rama and he came as Krishna and he came as Jesus and he came again as Ramakrishna, or even as Chaitanya, even though he came in all of those, in each one of them, he shone through a particular personality that highlighted a different part of the scripture, a different part of truth, helped people in a different path or in a different worldview to attain the same goal. And so you are that way also. When you drop ego self, it's not that you won't be. I'm going to get myself in big trouble here. You'll still be your charming self. People will still recognize you because we're all egos running around. So we're going to assume a big old ego in you anyway. We're going to assume you're still you and you're going to look like you. You're going to be a lot nicer you than you've ever been before. And we'll remark on that. We'll think, wow, God, how did Mick become such a nice guy overnight like that? That's incredible. But the fact is, in Mick's realization, he's no longer Mick. He'll still have the name, still carry the name, but Mick is light. Mick is pure love, pure grace, pure wisdom. And he goes around not thinking about that. There's no noisy bird, lower bird in the mind running around trying things anymore. That the bird of thinking has ceased. That ocean has calmed. And now there's just the self, unified, full acceptance, full love in the moment, knowing that the moment is perfect as it is. And the thought in that mind doesn't arise as thought. As it comes through, it becomes. It's expressed instantly, spontaneously. And that spontaneity, that spontaneous exhibition of the self, of Satchitananda, is always perfect. It never makes a wrong move. That's why these avatars are just move so nicely through the world, so confidently through the world, is that they're not planning it. They're not calculating things. They're not thinking about the effect of what they're saying. They're not thinking about what needs to be taught next. They simply are being, and God is manifesting. And that's what Zazen is. That's what our practice is for, is to allow that simple, spontaneous being, our true nature, ourself, finally at peace, finally at rest, finally full, no longer hungry and needy and starving and begging of some God somewhere to give us, help us, present to us, make us, whatever. All of that stops. That suffering is finished. Here is another famous koan. Zuakan was a Zen master who always used to address himself. Zuakan, he would call, and then he would answer, yes. Zuakan, yes. Of course, he was living all alone in his small zendo, and of course he knew who he was, but sometimes he lost himself. And whenever he lost himself, he would address himself. Zuakan, yes. There's a nice practice right there. you know. I've actually tried that practice with the purpose of sobering myself up, is what I call it. You know, it's like when my mind is pulling in directions that I don't want to go, and I'm sitting there, and that classic discussion between this imagined sentient mind and myself starts happening, you know, where I'm trying to resist and trying to go a different direction. This practice is very helpful. Call yourself the self, your higher self, the self that you love to be, that you're hoping is all that you will be one day. Call that self by name, and do it in the deepest sense of sobriety that you can, you know, without any of stories happening. Call yourself and say, come out, stand up, be right now, be. We need you to be. You know, and to bring yourself back to that center, you know, to know that center self, that established self, the self of you that is strong always. You know, we have no weakness in us. We have only forgetfulness, and we give our forgetfulness reasons. And those reasons are what need to go, because there are no reasons to be forgetful. And we believe there are. We believe there's an advantage to forgetting sometimes. And so that call to sobriety is to stop that immediately. No, there is no reason to go. There is no argument. There is no more than one person here. And that one person is established in this, you know, pure love, pure witness, pure strength. My yes is yes, my no is no. Not because I'm strong in my argument, but because there is only one person here. And when I say no, it is no. And when
Swami,
I say yes.
Could you please repeat, there is no something, there's only forgetfulness?
Yeah, okay. There's no weakness. There's none such thing as weakness in you. What you attribute to weakness is ignorance, in the sense of ignorance. You ignore your higher self. You ignore what you know is proper, and you use whatever distractions necessary to silence that established self. So it's not that you're weak, it's that you enjoy ignorance. And so the only thing that we have instead of weaknesses is that ignorance, that forgetfulness. You know,
Thank you.
that's the only danger of the world. The world can't touch us. You know, the world can't actually touch the soul, the self, which is why we suffer so much here, because we go looking for something. We go looking for a kind touch in the world, and we can't be touched by the world. The world is material and we are spiritual. You know, we vibrate too high for that. But we go looking in the world for these things, and there's nothing there but forgetfulness. And even though we can't be touched, we can be caused a lot of pain just through forgetfulness, through the intoxication of the senses. That's how we suffer. That's how our attachments grow for the temporary things that change. And when we go for those things, when we grab those things, we suffer. Oh, we suffer. And to the degree that we know that suffering, to that degree, we know the divine nature. Because if you've sat in the beloved divine space, how beautiful, how peaceful, how marvelous. And you compare that to a moment of pleasure or to a moment of distraction in the world, and you see how one is a fool's game and the other is divine. It becomes very clear, and you realize how life is suffering. That when these great saints say life is suffering, we sometimes think they're being a little dramatic, maybe to get our attention. But it's because they've touched divine bliss, and they see life in the world compared to divine bliss they can't even imagine. You know, they just can't. That's, you know, compassion is born deep because of that. They see that suffering. If we are like a frog, we are always ourselves. But even a frog sometimes loses himself, and he makes a sour face. And if something comes along, he will snap it and eat it. So I think a frog is always addressing himself. I think you should do that also. Even in Zazen, you will lose yourself. When you become sleepy or when your mind starts to wander about, you lose yourself. When your legs become painful, why are my legs so painful? You lose yourself. Because you lose yourself, your problem will be a problem for you. If you do not lose yourself, even though you have difficulty, there is actually no problem whatsoever. That's a nice idea. The thing that creates your problem is losing yourself. And what does losing yourself mean? It means not knowing who you are. It means getting caught up in the story of the moment. Whatever the story buzzing around is, you believe it and become an actor in it instead of keeping the story in you. And it's interesting, because especially in Christianity, there's that whole theater of the lost sheep. I was lost and then I was found, in the song Amazing Grace. We don't often think of Christianity and Buddhism together, but think of that. That's that same rhetoric that the Buddha is talking about here. Don't be lost, be found. Find yourself. Find who you are, and do that through your practice, through trying to get the mind silent enough so that you can hear. Because to be yourself is not to be what you think you are. That's the problem. To be yourself is to be without thinking about it, without calculating it out. Quite often, if you start watching your mind, you see how much of your presentation to the world is a calculation. You sit there in conversation with somebody, you're not listening to them. You're listening to them just enough to formulate your response. And once you've listened enough to formulate your response, you're just waiting for them to stop talking so that you can deliver this wonderful response you've put together. You see, and if you start paying attention like that, you see why they say the world is a stage. They say it because that's what it is. We all are out there presenting ourselves to the world, our wonderful sense of humor, our charming personalities, our great stories, our wonderful spiritual accomplishments. And those things that we don't have, we make up. We put on a costume and become even better than we are. So, it's a mess. We're lost. We've lost our sense of what's important. We begin to think that our performance in the play is what's important. And we begin to value that and value ourselves according to that. And then, what that does to us, my goodness, how off center we can get then in our insecurities, our lonelinesses. And then we start misunderstanding people around us because we've misunderstood ourselves. And it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So he's saying here, when that always address yourself, call yourself into sobriety, call yourself into the moment. So he's telling you, okay, we're getting this advice now from two saints. Here, our brother Suzuki is telling us you should constantly be calling yourself back into presence. And in the evening class with Vedic Christianity, Brother Lawrence is saying the one most important practice of a spiritual seeker is a constant returning to the presence of God within, to constantly returning to the present moment, to this isness. And he says, as many times in the day as you can, stop what you're doing, go to visit the inner shrine for a moment, bow down to the light within, bow down to the truth of your being, bow down and remind yourself of Sat Chitananda, and then go about your day and continuously do this. You see, this is why our practice should have no boundary, why we have to understand that life is practice, because this is a task. This forgetfulness is a constant present danger. Only because we've not developed any of our sense of self on the unchanging. We've developed our whole sense of self in the changing mind. That's why we're always in danger. Not that it's actually dangerous, but our love of intoxication is dangerous, to us, because it's habitual, because we're not in charge of it, because we can't say no to it. I remember in high school, one of the things that Neil Gallagher, he was the preacher in my church, back then. And he says, you know, that, oh God, I got all caught up thinking about Neil Gallagher and I forgot what I was going to say. But he would always talk about he said he would say two things. He would say that you can never correct somebody more than you love them. So if you're going to correct somebody, you should stop and say to yourself, do I love that person as much as I'm correcting them? Or do they know that I love them as much as I'm correcting them? You know, the way I like to describe that is that if you're going to yell at somebody, if you find yourself yelling at somebody for doing something wrong, think to yourself, have you ever been brought to the point of yelling your love to somebody? If you haven't been brought to the point of yelling your love to that same person, then you have no right in the world whatsoever to be yelling in anger at that person. Because you cannot correct somebody beyond the degree that they love you, that they know that you love them. But this anyway, that's a good story from Neil. It's not the one I was looking for, but you all are going to grow old with me. All right, so if you do not lose yourself, even though you have difficulty, there's actually no problem whatsoever. And this is that notion, you see, I've said it a few times lately, but it's important. This moment is perfect. There's no doubt about it. Nothing needs to change. This moment is divine. As it is, no change is required. And the reason that we don't see that is because this moment is not perfect for a body, right? This body's growing old. That's not perfect for a body. So we're not the body. That's why. So that is not what makes the moment perfect or imperfect. This moment will never be perfect for a mind, right? The mind will always have moods and states of being and ill perspectives. So we're not talking about a moment that's perfect for the mind. So don't identify with the mind. The moment is perfect for a soul, for your divine self, for your divine being. The moment is always for the manifestation of the highest self. It's not for the body and it's not for the mind. So if you're finding the moment to be imperfect, it's because of body and it's because of mind. And you should use that discomfort as a reminder that you are not either of those. And you return to the shrine and take comfort in the self, this unchanging immortal self that you are. And through that practice, that is why he would say something that even though you're having difficulty, even though the body's uncomfortable because you've been sitting so long, or if the mind is restless, even though you're having difficulty, if you identify as soul, you realize that those things are just mantra, that those difficulties are just there to put your mind back where it should be. You use the difficulties of life to remind yourself of the perfection of the soul, of the immortality, of the pure love, of the pure wisdom, of the enlightenment. You remind yourself. And you go back and be established in that space. And then you carry on in life spontaneously and relaxed, without the anxiety, without the need to act out something. You can return to just being something. So even though you have difficulty, there is actually no problem whatsoever. Life is going on perfectly. You just sit in the midst of the problem. When you are part of the problem, or when the problem is part of you, there is no problem, because you are the problem itself. The problem is you, yourself. If this is so, there's no problem. It's always God manifesting. When you see it as God manifesting and you remove your identity from it, there's no problem. That's why they say that realized souls can't create karma. That's why they say shocking things like they could commit murder and not be guilty, because they're not the doers. And they're in a space of really knowing that. Now, that's a high teaching. So I know you say something like that and immediately inside there's like, well, why are you saying they can commit murder? Well, they could. They don't, aside from killing everybody at the end of life. But that's beside the point. But you see, this is the notion. If you learn to see yourself as soul, if you learn to establish yourself in this beautiful, beautiful shrine in the heart, where your unchanging self resides, where the eternal is, the eternal moment, the isness is there, that you go and identify with that, and the moment becomes perfect. You can leave the angry, restless mind. You can leave it. You can walk away from it and close the door and be at peace. You can leave the aching, aging, sick, or healthy, vibrant body. You can leave it behind and find the perfection of the moment, because you carry it with you. But you have to break that attachment to being a body, to being a mind, and to identifying yourself by the story, creating the story to maintain the illusion of an ego, which doesn't exist. And so to maintain that is going to be a continuous stream of work and requirement. As you can see, the world is going on continually, maintaining our sense of self. When your life is always a part of your surroundings, in other words, when you are called back to yourself in the present moment, then there is no problem. When you start to wander about in some delusion, which is something apart from you, yourself, then your surroundings are not real anymore. And your mind is not real anymore, right? So when you start to wander about in some delusion, which is something apart from yourself, when your surroundings are not real anymore, your mind is not real anymore. So what does it mean to wander around in a delusion? It means to assume things you don't know, right? It's always important to know that you don't know the person you're talking to, ever. You don't know them. You cannot know them. You do not have access to their mind and to their inner world. So you cannot know them. So for you to assume that you know them is a delusion, and you will project behaviors on them. And when they don't act accordingly, there'll be disappointment, there'll be surprise, there'll be betrayal, there'll be whatever. But the fact is you never knew them. And so we don't approach somebody as if we know them. We approach somebody openly, accepting them as they are, and knowing that there's a light, a projector in there called the divine, which is manifesting through them. So we see that. We make no assumptions. You make no assumptions about living. That's the part of that is letting go of the ego. Let go of thinking that you know anything. Let go of what you think you have figured out, because you'll find that you haven't. You've simply made some safe assumptions about things and set up a life according to those boundaries. But those things shift, those things move, and then there's suffering, and then there's fear, and all of that. When you start to wander about in some delusion, which is something apart from you, yourself, then your surroundings are not real anymore, and your mind is not real anymore. If you lose yourself, if you yourself are deluded, then your surroundings are also a misty, foggy delusion. Once you are in the midst of delusion, there is no delusion, no end to delusion. If you go to work and you play your role there, then that whole work environment can take on a very odd story. You can be suspicious of people trying to take your job. You can become suspicious of people trying to undermine your efforts. You can become suspicious of people being nice to you. Are they trying to get a raise? Are they trying to get ahead? You become suspicious of people wanting to help, thinking, why are they trying to help me on this? And you fall into that story. And the more you believe that story, the more of a player you are, right? And you start to become the things that you are afraid of. You start to become the manipulator. You start to become the person who's trying to get ahead, who will use anybody for anything kind of ideal. You see, that is when you start walking around in delusions. You've actually believed your story. I'm a CEO. I'm a head accountant. I'm important, whatever it is. You've fallen into that delusion, and it started spinning out of control. And you get saved from that when you come back to being a person. Become a person who's just doing the best that he or she can, who's just living life as friendly and as lovingly as he or she can, who's trying to manifest their inner light of wisdom and pure love. That's my job. That's my identity. That's what I am all the time. Those people rise to the top quickly, not because they're seeking it, but because they're beautiful. They're beautiful people who have set aside the delusion. and have remembered who they are and live accordingly. Always the same person, not a CEO at work and a husband at home. No, they're the same person. They're lovers. They're compassion. They're centers of compassion, centers of caring, because they're always themselves. They're never-
Gentle reminder.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. Except we're only halfway through the chapter. All right. Very good. And are there any questions or concerns? We'll pick up there, because I do think it's important not to keep pushing. Is there any questions or concerns about things? Insights? Something you liked? Something, a new idea?
I wrote it down. There is no weakness. There is only forgetfulness.
Yes. That's an important one. Because we always, the other thing we always have to look out for, not only does the ego want to rush in and save the day by making things difficult, making things look difficult so that it can fix them. There's also that victim ego. That victim ego, like, oh, I tried so hard and I just couldn't do it. That's nonsense. There's only one person inside you, and that one person can do anything. That one person is all the strength necessary to live life. And so when we turn ourselves into that victim, terrible thing to do. Absolutely terrible. That's why I tell people, don't fight with your weaknesses. Let's say, I can't say weaknesses because they're not weaknesses. Don't fight with your attachments. Let's put it that way. Don't fight with your attachments. If you fight, you've split your sentience. You've taken away your power as one, the power of one. You've now split your sentience with an imagined self that you're arguing with in your mind. And so you've given away half of your power to something non-existent that you're going to fight with in your mind. You've given half your power to the ego self, to the lower bird. And then as the higher bird, you're going to sit there and fight. Well, there's only one reason to fight, and that is to lose. You think that we fight to win, but in spiritual life, we fight to lose. Because if there's a fight, you've already forgotten who you are. If there's a fight, you've already forgotten that you are that divine self. There's only one person in here, and when it says no, it's no. When it says yes, it's yes. And so what happens is you break yourself into two people, this imagined lower bird who wants to go have that 9th piece of cake, and the higher self, which knows that, 400 pounds is heavy enough. We don't need a 9th piece of cake. But then you go and fight with yourself. Well, who's fighting with who? There is no two people in there. So you will fight long enough to feel good about having fought. And then you can say, I tried so hard, but I was weak and I gave in. I lost. But I fought hard. I fought valiantly. I just lost. It's like, you liar. You deluder, what is this? You didn't fight at all. You broke yourself into two people and you went for what your senses wanted. That's not what's up. There's one of you. Decide what you are. Decide what you want and be that. Don't divide. You're not a victim. There are no victims. There's only delusion. So don't be deluded. All right? Be bright, loving, positive, beautiful people today. Oh God, we need you. We need you.
We need
All
you
right.
too. We need
Yes.
you.
Yes, and we're all needing that one for sure. All right,
Thank you.
friends. Yeah,
Thank you, Swami.
indeed. Thank you for the reminder. Be well. And no class tonight. If you know anybody that comes to that class, let them know. I'll try and send out notes this afternoon. All right. Jai Ma.
Thank you. Jai Ma.